On Father's Day morning, my son Derek showed up at my door unannounced. Before I could even say hello, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Rick's more of a father to me than you ever were." 3 days later, he came crawling back with an apology I never expected. You won't believe what changed his mind. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The coffee maker sputtered its final drops into the carafe as I stood in my kitchen that Tuesday morning, staring at the envelope on my counter. Inside was an invitation to Derek's company awards dinner, the kind of event where sons usually brought their fathers to celebrate achievements. My name had been crossed out in blue ink. Written above it in Derek's handwriting was a single word, Rick. I'm Harold Mitchell, though most people call me Hal. 68 years old, retired after spending 4 decades as an electrician for the city of Portland. My hands are scarred from wire cuts and electrical burns, my back aches on rainy days from years of crawling through attics and basements, and my knees protest every time I climb a ladder. But I'd done honest work, raised my son the best I could after his mother Patricia left when he was 12, and never once asked for recognition. Apparently, that wasn't enough. My wife Maggie walked into the kitchen, her reading glasses perched on her nose, carrying the morning newspaper. She'd been in my life for 12 years now, a steady presence after the chaos of my first marriage ended. She glanced at my face, then at the envelope in my hands. "What's wrong, Hal? You look like someone kicked your dog." I handed her the invitation without a word. She pulled out the card, her eyes scanning the elegant script before landing on the crossed-out name. Her expression shifted from curiosity to something harder, protective. Derek did this? Apparently, Rick Donovan is Father of the Year now. I tried to keep my voice level, but the bitterness leaked through anyway. Rick was Patricia's new husband, the flashy real estate developer who'd swept into their lives 5 years ago with his waterfront mansion and luxury cars. The man drove a Tesla, owned a boat he probably used twice a year, and threw money around like confetti at a parade. Maggie set the invitation down on the counter with deliberate care, the kind of controlled movement that meant she was angrier than I was. How long has this been going on? The disrespect? I thought back over the past few months, cataloging the small cuts that I'd brushed aside as Derek just being busy or stressed. About 6 months, maybe longer. Ever since Rick started including him in those golf outings and investor dinners. It had started subtly. Derek canceling our monthly breakfast at Morning Brew Cafe because Rick had invited him to some exclusive business networking event. Derek asking Rick for career advice instead of calling me. Derek's kids, Chloe and Mason, talking excitedly about Uncle Rick's pool and home theater while barely mentioning the treehouse I'd spent 3 weekends building in my backyard. The comparison had been implicit at first, a shadow that grew darker with each passing month. But this invitation made it explicit. Rick was the father figure Derek wanted at his moment of professional triumph. I was just the guy who'd changed his diapers and taught him to ride a bike. I picked up my coffee mug, one of those ceramic ones Derek had made for me in high school pottery class. It was lopsided and the glaze had cracked over the years, but I'd kept it on my desk at work for 20 years before bringing it home to retirement. The inscription read "World's Best Dad" in Derek's teenage handwriting. Apparently, that title had been revoked. "You should talk to him." Maggie's voice cut through my thoughts. "Tell him how this makes you feel." I shook my head. Derek's a grown man. If he wants Rick at his dinner, that's his choice. I'm not going to beg my own son for respect. But even as I said the words, something twisted in my chest. Pride, maybe, or the stubborn independence that had gotten me through 40 years of physical labor without complaint. I'd survived electrocution, falls from ladders, winters working in unheated crawl spaces, and a divorce that nearly broke me. I could survive my son's preference for a wealthier father figure. Maggie wasn't buying it. She knew me too well, had seen me work through my mother's death and my brother's cancer diagnosis with that same stoic silence. "Hal, bottling this up isn't healthy. You raised that boy alone for years. You deserve better than having your name scratched off like you're nobody. The thing is, I understood Derek's attraction to Rick on some level. Rick represented everything I'd never been able to provide. The man had money, connections, and the kind of confidence that came from never having to choose between paying the electric bill and buying your kid new shoes. He could offer Derek opportunities I'd never even known existed, introduce him to people who could advance his career, give advice about investments and business strategies that were completely foreign to an electrician's world. But understanding didn't make it hurt less. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Derek: "Hey Dad, got your RSVP yet? Need final headcount by Friday." He didn't even acknowledge what he'd done. Didn't recognize the insult of crossing out my name like I was an inconvenient +1 instead of his father. The casual tone of the message suggested he thought this was perfectly normal, perhaps even expected. I typed out a response, deleted it, typed another one, deleted that too. What was there to say? Congratulations on finding a better father? Hope you and Rick have a wonderful evening? Finally, I settled on something simple: receive the invitation. Won't be attending. Have a good event. The 3 dots appeared immediately, indicating he was typing. They disappeared, reappeared, disappeared again. Whatever he wanted to say, he was thinking carefully about the words. Finally, the message came through: "Okay, if that's how you want to be. Rick said you'd probably react like this." Rick said. The man was apparently discussing my relationship with my son, predicting my reactions, inserting himself into family dynamics like he'd always been there. The presumption of it made my jaw clench. Another message followed: "By the way, Rick's giving me investment advice for the kids' college funds. Said you probably never thought about tax-advantaged accounts. Might want to look into that." The implication was clear. Rick was the smart one, the forward-thinking one, the one who understood financial planning. I was just the guy who'd worked overtime shifts to pay for Derek's braces and saved in a basic savings account because I didn't know there were better options. I set the phone down before I could type something I'd regret. Maggie had been reading over my shoulder. Her hand found mine, squeezing gently. "You know what you need to do, right? Ignore it?" She shook her head. "No, Hal. You need to show him what he's too blind to see. Rick might have money, but you have something he'll never have." "What's that?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "History. Sacrifice. The kind of love that doesn't come with a price tag." But I wasn't sure Derek valued those things anymore. In his world of corporate achievement and networking events, sacrifice probably looked like failure. Working-class endurance probably seemed like lack of ambition. And unconditional love without expensive gifts to show for it might just seem like being too poor to do better. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, the walls closing in with memories of Derek as a child. I remembered teaching him to use tools in my garage workshop, his small hands gripping a screwdriver while I guided him through basic repairs. I remembered every parent-teacher conference I'd attended alone, every school play where I'd been the only single dad in the audience, every birthday party I'd planned with whatever money was left after bills. I'd given Derek everything I had. Apparently, it wasn't enough. The week crawled by with an uncomfortable silence hanging over my house like morning fog that refused to burn off. Maggie kept glancing at me during meals, clearly wanting to say something but holding back. I went through my usual routines with mechanical precision. Tending the vegetable garden Derek used to help me plant when he was 10. Organizing tools in the garage workshop where I'd taught him the difference between a Phillips and flathead screwdriver. Fixing the squeaky hinge on the back door that had been annoying me for months. Thursday afternoon, I was under the kitchen sink replacing a worn-out P-trap when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but the Portland area code made me answer. "Mr. Mitchell? This is Barberichin from Chen and Associates. I'm calling about your estate planning documents." I sat up too quickly and banged my head on the cabinet. Estate planning wasn't something I thought about often. I'd drawn up a basic will years ago, leaving everything to Derek with a provision for the grandkids. Standard stuff that my union benefits coordinator had helped me arrange. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Yes, this is Harold Mitchell. Is there a problem? No problem at all. Your son Derek contacted me yesterday requesting copies of your will and any trust documents. He mentioned something about helping you update your estate plan and wanted to review what you currently have in place. My grip tightened on the phone. Derek had requested copies of my will. Without asking me first. Without even mentioning it during our brief text exchange about the awards dinner. I didn't authorize anyone to receive those documents, I said carefully. Derek had no business looking into my estate planning, especially not after crossing my name off his invitation like I was irrelevant. I understand, Mr. Mitchell. That's precisely why I'm calling. We never release documents without explicit client permission. I wanted to verify this request with you directly before proceeding. Please don't send him anything. If I decide to update my estate plan, I'll contact you myself. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Mitchell, if you don't mind me saying, it might be wise to schedule an appointment regardless. Estate plans should be reviewed periodically, especially when family dynamics change. Family dynamics. That was a polite way of saying when your son decides his stepfather is more valuable than you are. I'll think about it. Thank you for calling, Ms. Chen. After hanging up, I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet, tools scattered around me. Derek was checking on my will. The implications twisted in my mind like live electrical wires. Was he worried about his inheritance? Was Rick putting ideas in his head about what I might be worth? Or worse, was this his way of preparing for a future where I wasn't around, making sure everything was properly arranged for his benefit? Maggie appeared in the doorway, took one look at my expression, and immediately knew something had shifted. What happened? I told her about the lawyer's call. About Derek trying to access my will without my knowledge or permission. About the presumption that he had any right to my private financial documents. Her face flushed with anger I rarely saw from her. That boy needs a reality check. That boy is 35 years old and apparently thinks I'm just a bank account waiting to be inventoried. The words came out harsher than I intended, but they captured the essence of what had been building for months. Derek's increasing distance, his preference for Rick's company, the casual way he dismissed my contributions to his life. All of it pointed toward a transactional view of our relationship. I was valuable for what I could provide, not for who I was. Friday morning arrived with overcast skies that matched my mood. I was in the garage sharpening saw blades when Derek's car pulled into my driveway. Through the open garage door, I watched him get out, dressed in expensive business casual clothes that probably cost more than my entire week's grocery budget. He walked with the confident stride of someone who expected to be welcomed. "Hey Dad. Got a minute?" I kept working on the saw blade, the rhythmic scrape of metal on stone filling the silence. "I've got several minutes. What do you need?" He stepped into the garage, glancing around at the organized chaos of my workshop. We'd maintained cordial relations since the divorce, Patricia and I. Not friendly exactly, but civil enough to manage holidays and grandchildren visits without drama. She'd married Rick 3 years after our divorce was finalized, and I'd never begrudged her the happiness or the financial security he provided. But seeing her now, with Derek's words still fresh in my mind, I felt a knot of tension form in my chest. "Hal." Her voice carried the careful neutrality of someone navigating dangerous territory. "The kids wanted to see the treehouse. I hope that's all right." "Of course it's all right." I set down my hammer and wiped sawdust from my hands. "Hey, you too. Come give your grandpa a hug." Chloe and Mason ran across the yard with the uncomplicated joy of children who didn't yet understand adult complications. Mason crashed into my legs while Chloe wrapped her arms around my waist. They smelled like the expensive shampoo Patricia probably bought from some boutique store, but their hugs felt the same as always. "Can we go up in the treehouse, Grandpa?" Mason's gap-toothed grin was infectious. "We brought the action figures you gave us for Christmas." "Sure thing, buddy. I'll be right here if you need me." They scrambled toward the old oak tree in the corner of my yard where I'd spent 3 weekends last fall building them a proper treehouse. Not some kit from a hardware store, but a real structure with walls, a roof, a rope ladder, and a small deck. I'd used leftover materials from various jobs, fitting pieces together like a puzzle until it became something sturdy and safe. Patricia watched them climb with the vigilance of a grandmother who'd seen too many emergency room visits. When they disappeared inside, she turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Derek told me what happened." Her words came out rushed, like she'd been practicing them. "About the invitation, about your argument on Friday." "Hal, I'm sorry." "You don't need to apologize for your son's choices, Patricia." She flinched slightly at the formality. We'd been married for 15 years before everything fell apart, and some part of her probably still remembered when we'd been Harold and Patty, young and optimistic about building a life together. "Rick feels terrible about the whole situation." She twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit I remembered from our marriage. "He never meant to come between you and Derek." "Rick didn't come between us. Derek made that choice himself. But Rick encouraged it, even if he didn't mean to. The gifts, the networking opportunities, the financial advice. He was trying to help, but I think he didn't realize how it would look. How it would make Derek view you differently." I picked up a piece of sandpaper and ran it along a rough edge of the new deck board, needing something to do with my hands. "Derek's 35 years old, Patricia. He's responsible for his own perceptions and choices. If he values Rick's money and connections over the fact that I raised him, that's on him, not Rick." She moved closer, lowering her voice so the children wouldn't hear from the treehouse. "Derek called Barbara Chen because Rick suggested it. Said you should have proper estate planning, that working-class people often don't understand complex financial instruments. Rick meant well, but it came across wrong. So now Rick's giving Derek advice about my finances." The sandpaper stilled in my hands. "About how I'm too simple to manage my own estate planning?" "That's not what he meant, Hal. Rick just thinks in terms of wealth management and tax optimization. It's his world. He assumed you'd want professional help." "I have professional help when I need it, Patricia. What I don't need is my son and his stepfather discussing my private financial matters behind my back like I'm incompetent." A crash from the treehouse made us both jump, followed by Mason's laughter and Chloe's shout about being more careful. The normalcy of their play stood in sharp contrast to the tension crackling between their grandparents. Patricia sighed deeply, and for a moment I saw the woman I'd married 3 decades ago. Tired, trying to hold too many pieces together, caught between competing loyalties. Derek's always struggled with self-worth. You remember that. Even as a kid, he compared himself to everyone, always felt like he wasn't measuring up. Rick gives him that validation he craves. Makes him feel successful, important, connected to something bigger. I gave him validation too. Every report card I praised, every little league game I attended, every time I told him I was proud of him. That wasn't enough? It was enough for being a good dad, Hal. But Rick gives him something different. Access to a worldview I never understood. Country clubs, investment portfolios, business connections that can advance his career. Derek's ambitious. Always has been. Rick feeds that ambition in ways we couldn't. So I should just accept that my value as a father is less than Rick's value as a wealthy mentor? She didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. We both knew Derek had made his calculation and found me wanting in the final tally. The kids want you at the awards dinner. Patricia changed tactics. They've been asking Derek why Grandpa Hal isn't coming. He told them you were busy, but Chloe didn't believe him. She's 9, Hal. She picks up on these things. The manipulation was subtle but effective. Using my grandchildren as leverage, appealing to my desire to be present in their lives. But I'd learned something from Derek's behavior over the past week. Sometimes love required boundaries, even when those boundaries hurt. Tell Chloe I love her, but this is between Derek and me. She doesn't need to be involved. She's already involved. They both are. Derek's been different lately, more stressed, more short-tempered with the kids. I think this situation with you is affecting him more than he wants to admit. Good. Maybe it should affect him. Maybe he should think about what he's losing while he's busy celebrating what Rick can give him. Patricia's expression hardened slightly. You're being stubborn, Hal. This is your son. Your only child. Are you really going to let pride destroy your relationship over one stupid invitation? It's not about the invitation, Patricia. It's about respect. It's about Derek deciding his stepfather is worth more than the man who raised him alone after you left. It's about him trying to access my will without my permission because Rick told him to. It's about being treated like I'm obsolete now that someone wealthier and more successful is available. The words came out sharper than I intended, cutting through years of careful civility. Patricia took a step back, hurt flashing across her face. I left because we wanted different things, Hal. You know that. We'd grown apart, wanted different lives. But I never tried to poison Derek against you. I never told him you weren't good enough. You didn't have to. You married a millionaire and gave Derek a front row seat to everything I couldn't provide. The comparison was built into the situation. That's not fair. Maybe not. But it's true. Maggie appeared on the back porch, a tray of lemonade and cookies in her hands. She'd been watching from inside, giving Patricia and me space to talk but ready to intervene if needed. Her timing was perfect, breaking the tension before it escalated further. Thought the kids might be thirsty. She smiled warmly at Patricia, no hint of the underlying family drama in her expression. Hello, Patricia. Lovely to see you. You too, Maggie. Patricia's social graces kicked in automatically, years of practice smoothing over awkwardness. The children will appreciate the snacks. Chloe and Mason climbed down from the treehouse at the mention of cookies, their faces flushed from play and imagination. They descended on Maggie's offerings with the enthusiasm of kids who'd burned energy and needed refueling. While they ate, I watched them with that peculiar grandparents feel when contemplating futures they might not be fully part of. Would Derek's estrangement mean less time with these two? Would they grow up hearing Rick's version of events, learning to see their grandpa Hal as the stubborn old man who'd chosen pride over family? Patricia gathered the children after they finished their snacks, citing errands and homework that needed completing. Mason hugged me goodbye with sticky cookie hands while Chloe lingered, her sharp 9-year-old eyes studying my face. Are you mad at Daddy? The question came out small and worried. I knelt down to her level, ignoring the protest from my knees. No, sweetheart. Your daddy and I just have some grown-up stuff to work out. But I love you and your brother very much. Don't ever forget that. She hugged me tightly, her small arms surprisingly strong. I love you too, Grandpa Hal. I wish you were coming to Daddy's dinner. Me too, kiddo. Me too. After they left, I stood in my yard watching their car disappear down the street. Maggie came to stand beside me, slipping her hand into mine. That looked difficult. It was. But necessary, I think. Patricia tried to smooth things over, make excuses for Derek and Rick. But this isn't something that can be smoothed over with explanations about Rick meaning well or Derek struggling with self-worth. What are you going to do? I looked at the treehouse, at the deck boards I'd been replacing, at the garden where tomatoes were just beginning to ripen. All evidence of a life built with my own hands, nothing flashy or expensive, but solid and real. I'm going to call Barbara tomorrow morning. Schedule that estate planning appointment she recommended. If Derek's so interested in my will, he's going to find out exactly what choices I've made. Barbara Chen's office smelled like leather and old books, the kind of place where serious decisions got made and documented. Monday morning found me sitting across from her desk, Maggie beside me for support, while Barbara reviewed documents on her computer screen. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a directness I appreciated. No unnecessary pleasantries, no fake sympathy. Just professional competence. Mr. Mitchell, I've pulled up your current will. It's fairly straightforward. Everything goes to Derek, with a provision that if he predeceases you, assets transfer to your grandchildren in equal shares. Standard language, nothing complex. I nodded, remembering the afternoon 15 years ago when I'd sat in a union office filling out forms. Back then, it seemed simple. Take care of my son, make sure he had something after I was gone. The idea that he'd one day prefer another father figure had never crossed my mind. I want to change it. Barbara's fingers paused over her keyboard. What kind of changes are we discussing? I want to establish an education fund for Chloe and Mason. College tuition, books, reasonable living expenses while they're students. Managed by an independent trustee, not their parents. Derek gets nothing unless the kids don't pursue higher education, and even then it's restricted. Maggie shifted beside me. I could feel her surprise, though we'd discussed this in general terms. Hearing me state it so bluntly made it real in a way our kitchen table conversations hadn't. That's a significant change. Barbara leaned back in her chair, studying my face. Can I ask what prompted this decision? I told her everything. The crossed-out invitation, Derek's preference for Rick, the attempted access to my will, the garage confrontation. Barbara listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before speaking. Mr. Mitchell, I need to be clear about something. Estate planning shouldn't be done in anger or as punishment. These documents need to reflect your genuine wishes for asset distribution after your death, not your current emotional state regarding family conflicts. This isn't anger, Barbara. It's clarity. I've spent 35 years putting Derek first, sacrificing for his benefit, making sure he had opportunities one never did. But he's made it clear that my value to him is transactional. If Rick can offer more, I'm replaceable. Fine. But I won't reward that attitude with an inheritance he'll probably waste trying to impress people who don't matter. And the grandchildren? They deserve a chance at education without their parents' dysfunction interfering. I know how Derek operates now. He'd use any inheritance to fund his lifestyle, buy bigger houses and fancier cars to compete with people in Rick's circle. Chloe and Mason would see maybe a fraction of it. This way, they're protected. Barbara made more notes. We can absolutely structure it that way. I'll set up an irrevocable educational trust with specific guidelines about acceptable expenses. You'll need to name a trustee, someone you trust to make good decisions on the children's behalf. What about my wife? Maggie's fully protected. The house is jointly owned, so it automatically transfers to her. We can also set up a life estate provision ensuring she can live there for as long as she wants, even if circumstances change. Your retirement accounts should list her as primary beneficiary. They do. Good. Then we're looking at a fairly clean restructure. Primary assets to your wife, educational trust for grandchildren, minimal or restricted access for Derek. I'll draft the documents this week. You'll need to review them carefully, sign in the presence of witnesses, and we'll need everything notarized. How long before it's official? Once signed and notarized, it's immediately valid. I'd also recommend storing the original documents securely and providing copies to relevant parties so there's no confusion later. The relevant parties being Derek. Eventually, yes. Though you're not obligated to inform him immediately. Some clients prefer to let family members discover the changes after death, avoiding conflict during their lifetime. Others believe in transparency, explaining their reasoning while they're alive to discuss it. I want him to know. Not as revenge, but as a final lesson. Actions have consequences. Relationships require respect. You can't treat people as disposable and expect them to still provide for you. Maggie finally spoke up, her voice gentle but firm. Al, are you certain about this? Once Derek finds out, there's no going back. He'll be furious. This could permanently damage your relationship. It's already damaged, Maggie. He did that when he decided Rick was more valuable than me. I'm just making sure my estate planning reflects the reality he created. Barbara interjected with professional caution. Mr. Mitchell, I have to ask. Is there any possibility Derek might contest the will? Claim undue influence or lack of capacity? On what grounds? I'm 68, healthy, and mentally competent. I'm making these changes of my own free will with full understanding of the consequences. No one's pressuring me. In fact, my wife seems reluctant about the whole thing. I glanced at Maggie, who managed a small smile despite the gravity of the situation. Then we should be fine. Barbara typed rapidly, building the framework of my new estate plan. I'll also include a no-contest clause. If Derek challenges the will and loses, he forfeits even the minimal provisions I'll leave him. What minimal provisions? Barbara looked up from her screen. I'd recommend leaving him something, even if it's symbolic. A small cash bequest, maybe $5,000 or $10,000. It demonstrates you didn't simply forget about him, that the exclusion was intentional and considered. Makes the will harder to challenge on grounds of oversight or incapacity. The logic made sense, even if it felt like rewarding bad behavior. Fine. $10,000. Enough for him to know I remembered him, not enough to matter. We spent another hour going over details. Trustee selection settled on my younger brother Martin, a high school math teacher in Seattle with solid judgment and no stake in family drama. Specific provisions about what constituted acceptable educational expenses. Guidelines for distributing any remaining trust funds if both grandchildren chose not to attend college. By the time we finished, I felt drained but resolute. This was the right decision, even if it hurt to make it official. Barbara walked us to the door with a folder of preliminary documents. I'll have everything finalized by Friday. Come in next week to review and sign. Once that's done, your estate plan will reflect these new provisions. Driving home, Maggie was unusually quiet. We'd passed 3 stoplights before she finally spoke. You know Derek's going to find out eventually. Someone will mention it, or it'll come up in conversation. When he does, he's going to explode. Let him. I kept my eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel. I've spent 3 decades managing Derek's emotions, walking on eggshells to avoid triggering his temper or insecurity. I'm done. He made his choice. This is mine. And if he tries to reconcile? If this shocks him into realizing what he's losing? The question hung between us, possibility and hope wrapped in uncertainty. Part of me wanted that outcome, wanted Derek to wake up and see what his preference for Rick had cost him. But another part, the part that had listened to him dismiss 40 years of my work as irrelevant, knew better. Then he can start by showing respect instead of demanding money. Real reconciliation requires changed behavior, not just words when consequences finally arrive. We pulled into our driveway to find Derek's car already parked on the street. He was sitting on my front porch steps, still in his work clothes, looking agitated. When he saw us, he stood up quickly. Maggie tensed beside me. Do you want me to stay? Please. We got out of the car together, presenting a united front. Derek crossed the lawn toward us, his expression difficult to read. Angry, maybe. Or confused. Possibly both. Dad, we need to talk. His voice carried urgency without the hostility from our garage confrontation. I'm listening. He glanced at Maggie, clearly wanting privacy, but I made no move to send her away. Whatever he had to say could be said in front of my wife. Rick told me something today. Something that made me think about our argument differently. I waited, giving him space to continue while keeping my own expression neutral. He said you called his office last week. Asked to speak with him directly, not through Patricia. He told me you wanted to discuss the awards dinner situation, that you were upset about being replaced on the invitation. The claim caught me off guard. I'd called Rick's office. That was a complete fabrication. I'd never contacted Rick about anything, let alone discussed Derek's invitation preferences. I never called Rick's office, Derek. I don't even know his office number. Derek pulled out his phone, scrolling quickly before turning the screen toward me. Rick showed me the call log. Your number, last Tuesday afternoon, 12-minute conversation. I looked at the screen, seeing my home number listed alongside a timestamp and call duration. But I'd been at the hardware store last Tuesday afternoon, buying supplies for the deck repair. Maggie had been home alone. I didn't make that call, Derek. I wasn't even home at that time. Maggie's face had gone pale. She looked at me, then at Derek, then back at me. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. I called Rick's office. Derek stared at Maggie, confusion replacing anger on his face. She stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly together like she was trying to hold something in. I called Rick because I was worried, Hal. After you told me about the invitation, about Derek trying to get your will, I thought maybe if I explained the situation to Rick, he could talk to Derek. Help him see what he was doing to you. My chest tightened with a mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. Maggie had gone behind my back, contacted Rick without telling me, inserted herself into the conflict I'd been trying to navigate on my own terms. What did Rick say? The question came out quieter than I intended. Maggie's eyes filled with tears. He listened. He seemed genuinely surprised that Derek had crossed your name off the invitation. He said he'd had no idea Derek was trying to access your will. He told me he never meant to replace you, that he valued Derek having a relationship with his real father. Derek's face had gone through several shades of red during Maggie's explanation. He looked at his phone, then back at us, realization dawning. Rick never told me you called, Dad. He told me you called him. Said you were upset and accusatory, that you blamed him for coming between us. He made it sound like you were being unreasonable and jealous. The manipulation was elegant in its simplicity. Rick had taken Maggie's concerned phone call and twisted it into evidence of my supposed pettiness. Had used it to further drive a wedge between Derek and me, painting himself as the reasonable one caught between a vindictive father and a devoted son. Why would he lie about that? Derek's voice carried genuine bewilderment. Because Rick benefits from you preferring him over me. I kept my tone even, stating facts without accusation. As long as you see him as superior, he gets to play the role of successful mentor, generous stepfather, the man who saved you from your working-class origins. If we reconciled, if you started valuing what I offered instead of what I couldn't provide, his position becomes less special. That's crazy, Dad. Rick's not manipulating me. Then why did he lie about the phone call? Why did he tell you I contacted him when it was actually Maggie? Why did he frame her concern as my jealousy? Derek had no answer. He stood there in my yard, expensive suit slightly wrinkled from a day at work, looking younger than his 35 years. Lost. I need to talk to Rick. He pulled out his phone, but I stopped him with a raised hand. Before you do that, Derek, you need to understand something. I went to see Barbarian this morning. I'm changing my will. His face went pale. Dad, you don't have to do that. I know I screwed up with the invitation, and maybe I was wrong to try to see your estate documents, but you don't have to punish me financially. This isn't punishment. It's clarity. I'm setting up an education trust for Chloe and Mason. Everything goes to them for college, books, living expenses while they're students. Managed by your Uncle Martin, not you or Patricia. You get $10,000, enough to know I didn't forget you, not enough to matter. The words hit him like physical blows. I watched him process the information, his expression cycling through shock, anger, hurt, and finally something that looked like understanding. Because I said Rick was a better father than you. Because you treated me like I was worthless compared to him. Because you valued his money and connections over 35 years of me doing my best with what I had. Because you tried to access my private financial information without my permission. Because you made it clear that our relationship is transactional, and I refuse to enable that anymore. Maggie moved closer to me, her hand finding mine. Derek watched the gesture, seeing the united front we presented. I was wrong. His voice cracked slightly. About Rick being a better father. About the invitation. About trying to see your will. I was wrong about all of it. Saying you were wrong is easy, Derek. Showing me you understand why you were wrong is harder. Tell me what you've learned. He took a deep breath, collecting his thoughts. I got caught up in Rick's world. The money, the status, the opportunities. It felt good to be included in that lifestyle, to feel successful and connected. I started measuring my worth by what he could give me instead of remembering what you already had. The stability, the consistency, the actual parenting when Mom left. Keep going. You worked 12-hour shifts so I could have things I wanted, not just things I needed. You came to every school event even when you were exhausted. You taught me how to fix things, how to work with my hands, how to solve problems instead of just throwing money at them. Rick never did any of that. He just showed up later and offered shortcuts. And the invitation? There was no company restriction on +1s. I lied about that. Rick offered to upgrade the venue if I invited him instead of you. Made it seem like a business opportunity, a chance to network with his contacts. I convinced myself it was the smart career move, but really I was just choosing his money over your feelings. The honesty was raw and painful, exactly what I'd needed to hear but never expected him to articulate. I can't undo what I changed in the will, Derek. Those documents are being finalized this week. But if you're serious about rebuilding our relationship, it starts with respect, not inheritance expectations. I don't care about the money, Dad. I mean, I do, but not like you think. I just don't want to lose you over my own stupidity. Maggie squeezed my hand. We stood together in the yard where I'd built a treehouse for my grandchildren, where I'd taught Derek to use tools decades ago, where 40 years of modest but honest living had created something solid if not spectacular. You haven't lost me, Derek. But you need to understand that being my son doesn't entitle you to my estate. That has to be earned through relationship, through respect, through valuing what we have instead of what we don't. He nodded, wiping his eyes roughly. Can I still come around? Bring the kids to visit? Of course you can. This is about boundaries, not abandonment. You're always welcome here as my son. Just not as someone who sees me as inferior to his stepfather. We stood there awkwardly for a moment before Derek closed the distance and hugged me. It was brief, masculine, uncomfortable in the way of men who don't often show emotion. But it was genuine. After he left, Maggie and I sat on the porch steps watching the sun set over our neighborhood. The Hendersons were walking their dog. Mrs. Patterson was watering her roses. Normal suburban evening, normal lives continuing around us. Do you think he meant it? Maggie asked quietly. Time will tell. But at least now he knows where things stand. The will stays changed, the boundaries stay firm, and if he wants a relationship with me, it has to be built on respect, not transactions. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and we sat in comfortable silence while the evening deepened around us. Somewhere across town, Derek was probably confronting Rick about the lie. Tomorrow would bring its own complications. But tonight, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months since this whole situation started. Peace. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.